The room was full. Full of lawyers. Full of syndicate officials in pressed suits carrying leather folders. Full of hospital staff pretending to look busy. And not one of them, not a single person in that room, said a word about what was actually happening. Let me be very clear about what this means. A blind Omega was sitting alone on a hospital bed. He had been blind for 3 months. He had survived an explosion that was never meant for him. And the man responsible for his safety, the man who had promised to protect him, had just walked through that door holding divorce papers. That man was Draven Core. Mafia King. Alpha. Head of the Core Syndicate, which controlled port access, import routes, and half the city's underground financial infrastructure. He walked in wearing a black suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Gold crown insignia on his lapel. Not a hair out of place. He looked exactly like what he was. A man who had decided this situation was already resolved and had come only to make it official. The Omega on the bed was Ether Solrin. 26 years old. Slim. Dark-skinned. Short natural hair. Hospital gown. Dark glasses covering eyes that no longer worked. He sat with his hands folded in his lap and his face turned slightly toward the window, toward the light he could feel but not see, and he didn't turn when Draven entered. He knew the footsteps. He had memorized them a long time ago. Back when those footsteps meant something different. Draven crossed the room. Set the papers on the bed beside Ether without speaking. A lawyer stepped forward and explained the documentation. Fast. Efficient. Like this was a real estate transaction. Ether listened. He did not argue. He did not cry. He simply reached out, slowly, fingers finding the edge of the paper, and signed where he was told. Have you ever had to sign something that broke your own heart? Drop it in the comments. Because what happens in this room next is something nobody saw coming. Hi viewers, I want to ask you something personal. If someone mocked you at your lowest moment and then walked away, would you tell them what they missed? Comment yes or no, I read every single one. Draven watched him sign. His expression didn't change. He picked the papers up. Reviewed the signature. Nodded once. Then he said something. And I need you to understand. This is the sentence that everyone in that room heard and no one challenged. He said, at least now you won't embarrass the family name. The lawyers looked at their folders. The hospital staff found reasons to look at the floor. And Ether sat on that bed with his signed name on a divorce document and said absolutely nothing. Because that is what happens when someone has been told enough times that their pain is inconvenient. They learn to hold it quietly. They learn to stop expecting anyone to object. Draven turned to leave. He was 3 steps from the door. Then Ether spoke. Soft. Steady. No tremor in it. There are children in the room. Draven stopped. He turned slowly. What did you say? Ether's face was still turned toward the window. His hands were still folded. He hadn't moved. I said, Ether repeated quietly, there are children in this room. Draven looked around. The lawyers looked around. The room was empty of children. No sounds. No movement. Nothing. One of the lawyers leaned toward the other and whispered something about trauma affecting perception after head injuries. Draven's jaw tightened. He was already deciding how to respond to that, already calculating what this moment cost him in terms of the staff who had just witnessed it, when the door opened. A nurse entered. Carrying something small. Wrapped in white. Then a second nurse. Then a third. Then a fourth. And the room. The room full of powerful men who had just watched a blind Omega sign away his marriage without flinching, went completely, absolutely silent. For bundles. For babies. Tiny. Quiet. And every single person in that room understood what had just happened. Except Draven. who stood very still in the middle of the room with divorce papers in his hand and looked at 4 newborns being carried through the door of his ex-husband's hospital room, and did not yet understand that his entire life had just changed direction. The nurses moved carefully. 4 of them. 1 per baby. They lined the bassinets along the wall beside Ether's bed with the practiced efficiency of people who had been preparing for this moment and dreading it equally. The room had gone so quiet that the soft mechanical hum of the heart monitor sounded loud. Draven hadn't moved. He was still standing in the center of the room with the divorce papers at his side. His expression was controlled. The way his expression was always controlled. But his eyes had changed. Something behind them was working very fast. Processing. Calculating. Arriving at conclusions he wasn't ready for. One of the senior nurses, a woman named Celestine, small and precise, with the calm of someone who had delivered difficult news for 30 years, stepped forward. She said, "Mr. Solring was pregnant at the time of the explosion." Draven said nothing. "The trauma caused early labor during his coma," she continued. "The deliveries were emergency procedures. All 4 survived." Draven's voice came out very flat. "All 4. Yes. He was carrying 4. Yes, Mr. Kaur." A pause. One lawyer cleared his throat. No one looked at anyone else. "Why," Draven said slowly, "was I not informed?" Celestine met his eyes without flinching. Protocol required notification of next of kin. At the time of delivery, divorce proceedings had already been initiated. She paused. "Legally, you were no longer next of kin." The room absorbed that. Draven looked at the papers in his hand. Then at Ether, who had not moved, who had not turned toward the commotion, who sat with his hands folded in his lap, facing slightly away, as if the entire scene behind him was something he had already prepared himself for and had no energy left to perform a reaction to. "Ether," Draven said. Ether turned his face toward the sound of his name. Not toward Draven specifically. Just toward the voice. That distinction mattered. Draven noticed it. "Did you know," he said, "before the explosion? Did you know you were pregnant?" A pause. "Yes," Ether said. The word landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. Circles expanding outward. The lawyers went very still. "And you didn't tell me," Draven said. "No," Ether said. "Why?" Ether's hands tightened slightly in his lap. That was the only movement. "Because I wasn't sure you would want them," he said. "And I was afraid of what you would say if you didn't. That is the part one need you to sit with." He was afraid of what Draven would say. Not what he would do. What he would say. Because words had already done enough damage. Draven set the divorce papers down on the nearest surface. He walked to the bassinets. Looked at the 4 babies lying in their white wrappings. They were small. Smaller than he expected. Premature births always are. But their faces were clear. And their scent, the particular biological marker that alpha biology reads before conscious thought catches up to it, hit him like something physical. He's all 4 of them. His scent was in every one. The medical confirmation was a formality. His body already knew. He stood there for a long moment. Then Ether spoke from the bed. "May I hold one?" Celestine nodded to a nurse. The nurse lifted the nearest baby, the smallest one, quieter than the others, and carried her to Ether. She placed the infant carefully in Ether's arms. He didn't fumble. He found the baby's weight with practiced instinct, supporting the neck, cradling the body close to his chest, angling his face downward toward the warmth even though he couldn't see her. His fingers moved slowly across the baby's face. Forehead. Cheeks. The small curl of an ear. He exhaled. Long and quiet. The kind of exhale that carries something heavy out of the body. And then he smiled. Small. Private. Like the smile belonged only to him and to her. My stars, he whispered. Then his head lifted slightly. Counting. By sound. By the soft breathing of 3 more bassinets around the room. There are 4, he said. Not to anyone in particular. Just saying it out loud. Making it real. Draven watched him. He had seen Ether in many situations. Board dinners. Political functions. Crisis meetings. He had never seen him look like this. Like this was the one thing in the world he had been waiting to feel. Then the smallest baby, the one in Ether's arms, did something. She wrapped her fingers around Ether's index finger. Both hands. Tight. Like she recognized him. Like she had been listening to that heartbeat for months and knew exactly whose chest she was against. Draven stood at the edge of the bassinets and watched his ex-husband hold his daughter. And something moved through him that he did not have language for yet. It would take him weeks to find the right word for it. The word was shame. But before that word arrived, before any of the reckoning that was coming had a chance to begin, the alpha in him did something involuntary. He leaned slightly toward the nearest bassinet. Tested the air. The scent was unmistakable. All 4. He's. And Ether's. Theirs. Children that existed because of a marriage he had just dissolved in front of a room full of lawyers. He looked at the divorce papers sitting on the nurse's station counter. He looked at Ether. He looked at 4 babies. And for the first time in a very long time, Dravencore had no strategy. None. Just the specific, particular horror of a man who is beginning to understand exactly what he threw away. Draven wanted answers. That was how he handled everything he didn't understand. He demanded information. He found the edges of a problem and pressed on them until the structure became visible. So he turned to Celestine and said, "Get me the medical director." She left without argument. He turned to the lawyers. Out. They filed out quickly. Which left the room very quiet. Just Draven. Ether. For bassinets. And the particular weight of everything that had been said and not said for the past year. Ether was still holding the smallest baby. He hadn't looked up. He was doing something with his free hand, running his fingers along the edge of the bassinet beside him, mapping its dimensions the way he mapped everything now. Learning the world by touch since the world had stopped being visible. Draven watched him do that for a moment. Then he said, "How long have you known about them?" 7 months, Ether said. "You hid a pregnancy from me for 7 months." "We were already separated when I found out," Ether said. "You had already started the divorce process." Draven's jaw tightened. "That doesn't justify." "I know what it doesn't justify," Ether said quietly. No anger in his voice. No accusation. Just facts. The calm of someone who has already worked through every version of this argument alone and arrived somewhere past defensiveness. "You made it very clear," Ether said, "what you thought of a weak Omega." The sentence was short. But it filled the room completely. Because they both knew exactly which words Draven had used. He hadn't said weak Omega once. He'd said it in board meetings. He'd said it to his brothers. He'd said it while Ether was in the room and while Ether wasn't in the room, and the city had a way of carrying things back to the person they were said about. Draven didn't deny it. He couldn't. The medical director arrived. Tall man. Grey-haired. The particular composure of someone who had spent decades delivering information that people were not ready to hear. He confirmed everything Celestine had said. Pregnancy documented at 12 weeks before the explosion. Emergency delivery at 28 weeks during coma. All for pups placed in protected neonatal care. Survival rate against expectation. Genetic paternity confirmed through standard syndicate protocols within 48 hours of birth. "Why wasn't I notified?" Draven said. The director said, Carefully, Mr. Solrin had designated an alternate emergency contact. During the coma, decisions were made according to his documented wishes. What wishes? That the children's existence not be disclosed to parties involved in the divorce proceedings until Mr. Solrin regained consciousness and could make that decision himself. Draven looked at Ether. Ether said nothing. He was listening to the babies breathe. He made that decision, Draven said. While unconscious. He had documented it before the explosion, the director said. In a medical advance directive. Before the explosion. Ether had planned for the possibility of the explosion before it happened. That landed differently than Draven expected. Not as manipulation. As fear. As a man who lived close enough to danger to prepare for it. Who had been afraid, specifically, legally, documentably afraid. That if something happened to him, the people he loved most would end up alone with the person he was in the process of leaving. Draven sent the director out. The room went quiet again. One of the pups began to cry. A thin, high sound. Urgent. The other nurses moved toward the bassinet. But Ether turned his head before they reached it. Which one? He said. The second from the left, a nurse said. Ether shifted the baby in his arms carefully. Extended his other arm. Bring her to me. The nurse hesitated, a man holding one infant, blind, asking to hold a second. But Ether's posture was certain. Not requesting. Knowing. The nurse placed the second baby against Ether's other arm. He adjusted. Settled both. The crying stopped. Immediately. Draven stood against the far wall. He watched a blind Omega hold two premature infants with the particular steadiness of someone who had already been doing this, mentally, emotionally, in every way that mattered. For months before this moment. Something moved through him that he did not want to name yet. But it was there. And the two babies in Ether's arms, eyes closed, mouths soft, breathing slow, were already doing something that Draven had never seen directed at him in 27 years of being the most powerful man in most rooms. They were completely at peace. Not because they were safe from danger. But because they recognized the person holding them. Because they already knew him. And they had been waiting for this exact moment the way small things wait for warmth. Draven looked at the other two bassinets. At the tiny faces. At full lives that existed because of a marriage he had destroyed with words he said while he was angry and never once retracted. And for the first time in longer than he could locate, the mafia king who never lost control of a room, who had never once allowed himself to be visibly affected by anything. Felt his throat close. He turned away before Ether could hear the change in his breathing. Too late. Ether's head had already lifted slightly. Listening. He said nothing. But he heard it. Draven did not leave the hospital that night. He didn't announce that decision. He simply didn't go. His car waited in the garage. His driver sent 3 check-in messages. His security lead eventually stopped asking and posted 2 guards outside room for 12 instead. Because when Dravencore didn't leave somewhere, the correct response was to secure the perimeter and wait. He sat in the chair beside the window. The one that had stayed empty all day while lawyers came and went and nurses moved in and out and a marriage was formally dissolved in front of witnesses who all pretended not to feel the weight of it. He sat in it now. Not performing presence. Just there. Ether knew he was still in the room. He tracked movement by sound. Draven shifted in the chair at some point and Ether's face turned slightly in that direction, registering it, then returning to the babies. He was learning them. That was what he was doing. He held each one for a stretch of time. Named the sounds they made. The particular way each one breathed. The difference in weight between them, the smallest one, featherlight, and the largest, almost a full pound heavier, who made a specific complaining sound every time she was set down. By midnight Ether had worked out which cry meant hunger and which meant position and which was just sound, the kind babies make not because something is wrong but because they are still new to the experience of being in the world. Draven watched all of this from the chair. He did not offer to help. Partly because Ether didn't ask. Partly because Draven did not yet know how. Around 1 in the morning, Ether set the last baby down. He leaned back against the elevated hospital bed. His hands rested on his knees. He looked exhausted in the specific way that comes from the body trying to recover from months of damage while simultaneously experiencing the most significant emotional event of its life. Draven said, "You should sleep." "I know," Ether said. He didn't move. "Ether, I'm afraid if I sleep I'll wake up and it won't be real," he said. He said it simply. Not as performance. Just as the true thing. Draven had no response to that. He looked at the 4 bassinets. At 4 small breathing shapes in the low nightlight of a hospital room. He said, "They're real." Ether turned his face toward the sound of Draven's voice. That direct turn. Not quite meeting his eyes. But oriented toward him. "Why are you still here?" Ether said. Draven looked at the bassinets. "I don't know," he said. Which was probably the most honest thing he had said to Ether in 2 years. Ether nodded once. Like that was an acceptable answer. They stayed in the quiet for a while. Then Draven said the question he had been turning over all day. The one that mattered more than the legal questions and the medical questions and the strategic questions about what this meant for the syndicate. He said, "Why didn't you tell me?" Not accusatory. Genuinely asking. "You came in with divorce papers," Ether said. "Before the papers. Before the explosion. When you first found out." Ether was quiet. "Because I thought," he said slowly, "that you would see them the same way you saw me." Draven waited. "Weak," Ether said. "Something that complicated your life. Something you didn't want people to see you carrying." The room absorbed that. Draven thought about the specific words he had used over the past 2 years. The ones he said when he was frustrated. When business was hard and the pressure compounded and he came home and found Ether in spaces that felt inconvenient. He had not said them to wound. He had said them because he said things when he was pressured and had never once considered the weight they accumulated in the person absorbing them. That is not an excuse. It is just what happened. "You thought I would reject them," Draven said. "I thought you would reject them and then I would have to raise 4 children knowing their father saw them the way he saw me," Ether said. "I decided that was worse than raising them alone." Pause on that. Because that sentence, that calculation, tells you everything about what the past 2 years had cost Ether Solrin. He had not chosen to keep the pups secret out of revenge. He had chosen it out of protection. He had looked at 4 unborn lives and decided that the cruelest thing he could do to them was introduce them to someone who would make them feel small. A doctor knocked and entered before Draven could respond. Routine midnight check. She reviewed the bassinets. Made notes. Then paused. Turned to Draven with the particular expression of someone delivering information they have been holding all day and can no longer delay. "Mr. Kaur," she said. "There is something you should be aware of." Draven straightened. "The children's birth records were filed in a standard registry," she said carefully. "This hospital maintains confidentiality protocols. But birth records for infants of high-profile parentage can attract third-party interest." "What kind of interest?" Draven said. She said, "We received an unusual access request on the registry this afternoon. It came through a secure proxy. We blocked it." Draven was already on his feet. "From which network?" he said. The doctor said a name. And Draven's expression, which had been something new and unrecognizable for the past several hours, returned immediately to the one the city knew. Cold. Certain. Dangerous. The Varek Syndicate. His primary rival. They knew about the pups. Draven stepped into the hallway. The call took 40 seconds. His security director answered on the first ring. Draven kept his voice low. Level. The way his voice went when the situation required that the words carry more weight than the tone. The Varric network accessed a registry query on the Solrin birth records today, he said. I want surveillance on every entry point of this building within the hour. I want the pup's record sealed under a protected alias. And I want to know who authorized that query on their end and where that person is right now. He ended the call. Walked back into the room. Ether had heard his tone through the door. Not the words. The tone. What happened? Ether said. Draven looked at the bassinets. At the 4 sleeping faces. He said, someone else knows about them. The room went very still. Ether's jaw set. He said, who? Varric, Draven said. Ether's hands found the edge of the nearest bassinet. Gripped it. Not in panic. In the specific stillness of someone determining exactly what they are willing to do. They can't have them, Ether said. 3 words. Flat. Absolute. No question in it. No condition attached. Just the complete, unqualified refusal of a parent who has not been a parent for more than 1 day and already understands exactly what that means. Draven looked at him. That was the moment. He would remember it later as the moment something restructured inside him. Not the babies in the bassinets. Not the medical reports. Not for genetic confirmations. This. A blind Omega sitting on a hospital bed with his hands around a bassinet rail saying they can't have them the way a man says something he would die before he let become untrue. I know, Draven said. Then what's the plan? Ether said. Draven paused. Because the instinct, the old instinct, the one that had run his entire life, was to say, I'll handle it. Which was true. He would handle it. But something about the way Ether had asked made that answer feel insufficient. Ether wasn't asking to be reassured. He was asking to know. He was asking because these were his children and he had spent months making every decision about them alone, and he was not willing to return to that arrangement simply because the situation had become complicated. I'm moving you, Draven said. Tonight. The mansion has security infrastructure this hospital can't match. Ether said, I'm not going to your mansion. Ether. I don't trust your house, Ether said. I don't trust your people. I don't trust the environment my children would be walking into. He said, my children, the way you say something you have earned the right to say. These children are also mine, Draven said. I know, Ether said. That's part of what I don't trust. The honesty of that sentence was clean and precise, and it landed exactly where Ether intended it. Draven didn't argue. He couldn't. He had not earned the right to argue with that sentence. So he said, then tell me what you need. Ether was quiet for a moment. He was doing the thing where he listened to the room, assessing it the way he assessed everything now, through sound and air pressure and the particular quality of the silence between words. He said, I need to know my children are protected. They will be. I need to know I'm not trading one threat for another. A pause. I understand, Draven said. Do you? Ether said. Not as a challenge. As a real question. He turned his face toward Draven's voice. Because the last time I trusted you to understand something important to me, he said quietly, I ended up signing papers in a hospital room with lawyers who wouldn't look at me. Draven had no answer for that. He stood in the center of the room beside 4 bassinets containing full lives that existed in the middle of everything he had gotten wrong. Outside the door, his security team was moving. Somewhere across the city, the Varric syndicate was processing information that made Draven's children targets. And in the hospital room, a blind Omega was waiting for a real answer. Not a strategy. Not a promise of power. A real answer about what kind of person Dravencore was going to be now that everything had changed. Draven had built his entire life on knowing what to say in difficult rooms. He opened his mouth. and found that for the second time today, he had nothing. Then his phone rang. His security director. One sentence. "We have movement on the east wing." And whatever answer Draven had been trying to find, whatever words might have started to rebuild something, got cut off by the sound of a door alarm triggering 2 floors below them. Someone was already in the building. They were already inside the building. That was the information. Not approaching. Not surveilling from across the street. Inside. Remick said it once and then moved. Phone to his ear, hand signaled to the 2 guards posted outside the room, body already repositioning toward the door with the particular efficiency of someone who had trained for this moment and was now living it. Draven moved at the same time. 3 steps to the bed. "We're moving now," he said. Ether didn't argue. That was the first thing. He didn't freeze either. He didn't ask how many or where or what floor. He was already gathering the pups. Both hands moving. Fast, careful, the specific economy of someone who had learned to do everything without wasting a single motion. "How many can you carry?" Draven said. 2, Ether said. "Securely." "I'll take 2. You've never held them." "I'll figure it out." 1 second. That was how long Ether took to decide whether to trust that statement. Then he said, "Support under the neck. Don't let the head drop. The fighter will try to move. Keep your arm firm on his left side or he'll roll." Draven picked up the first pup. Found the neck. Found the left side. The fighter immediately pushed against his forearm. He held firm. The baby stilled. Looked up at him. That dark, alert gaze. Draven looked back. 1 second of that. Then he picked up the second. The watcher. She went quiet the moment she felt his hold. Already assessing. Already filing him away. Ether had the laughing one and the guilt tripper against his chest. Both arms curved, both babies settled, face forward, cane extended. "Which direction?" he said. "Left out the door. Staff corridor. 40 feet to the service elevator. Any turns?" "One right at 20 feet. I'll tell you." "Good." The door opened. Remick first. Then Draven. Then Ether. The hallway was bright. Fluorescent. Normal looking. Which was the problem? 2 of the Voss operatives had entered dressed as hospital maintenance. The disguise was good. The timing was calculated. They had moved to this floor during the shift change, the 12-minute window when security overlap was thinnest. Remick identified the first one at the far end of the corridor. The recognition was mutual. What happened next lasted 40 seconds. 3 of Draven's guards intercepted at the stairwell entry. Remick handled the near-side contact alone. Draven moved Ether and the pups into the staff corridor fast. The door closed behind them. The fluorescent light in the narrow corridor was different, yellower, older. Ether tracked the sound of it. 20 feet, Draven said. "I hear the elevator," Ether said. "Don't run." "I know." They moved. Steady. The babies were quiet. All 4 of them. Like they understood. Like for 2-month-old infants who had spent their entire lives listening to the world they couldn't yet see had already learned that silence was sometimes the most important thing you could offer. The elevator opened. They got in. The doors closed. Draven looked at Ether in the elevator light. At the 2 pups against his chest. At the white knuckles of his hands gripping the cane. At the expression on his face, controlled, focused, not letting anything through. This is what courage looks like when no one is watching and no one will ever thank you for it. Ether said, without turning, "Are they okay?" Draven looked at the 2 in his arms. "Yes," he said. "All 4. "All 4, Draven confirmed. Ether exhaled. Just once. Just enough. The elevator reached the parking level. Remick was already there. Car running. Door open. They were in and moving in under 30 seconds. Outside the hospital, the city looked exactly the same as it always did. Traffic. Rain starting. Nobody who glanced at that vehicle had any idea what was inside it. For premature pups in white blankets. A blind omega who had just navigated a hostile hallway by sound alone. And a mafia king sitting in the back seat holding two infants, one pressing against his forearm and one already asleep against his chest. Draven looked down at the sleeping watcher. Her face completely at rest. Trusting the hold she had been placed in. He said nothing. But something in him, something in the specific architecture of a man who had built his entire identity around controlled power, quietly acknowledged that it had just been rearranged. The mansion was in the northern part of the city. High walls. Private road. Security infrastructure that the Voss network did not have schematics for. That was the only advantage that mattered tonight. They arrived at 11:40. The staff had been notified. For rooms prepared. Medical equipment sourced. A nurse, Draven's personal medical contact, someone with syndicate clearance and 18 years of discretion, waiting in the main hall when they walked in. Her name was Petra Sable. She took one look at the 4 pups and went directly to work. Temperature checks. Weight assessments. Feeding protocols. No drama. No commentary. Just someone very good at her job doing it. Ether followed the sound of Petra's movements. He tracked the room. Doorway on the left. Staircase ahead. The particular echo of a high ceiling. He was mapping again. Starting over. The thing he had told Draven he didn't want to do. Draven watched him do it and said nothing. Because watching Ether rebuild a map of the world in real time was not something that required comment. It required witness. Later, after the pups were settled, after Petra had finished her assessment and retreated to the adjacent room, after the house went quiet, Draven found Ether sitting in the corner of the large bedroom that had been prepared for him. Not on the bed. On the floor. Back against the wall. Knees pulled up. Cane across his lap. Draven sat down across from him. The floor was cold marble. Neither of them mentioned it. The attack, Ether said. How close did they get? Close enough, Draven said. But not close enough. No. Ether nodded. The Voss network doesn't stop, he said. You know that. Yes. So this, he gestured at the room around him. At the mansion. At the security infrastructure that had replaced a hospital ward. This isn't the end of it. No, Draven said. It isn't. A silence. The kind that happens between people who are past pretending the situation is smaller than it is. Then Ether said, they'll try again. Yes. With 4 targets now. Yes. And one of those targets can't see them coming. Draven said, you saw them coming before my security team did. Ether was quiet. That's different, he said. That was sound. That was pattern recognition in a building I had mapped for 3 months. He turned his face slightly. This is a new building. New sounds. New distances. I'm starting from the beginning. Then I'll tell you everything, Draven said. About the building. About everything. A beat. You mean the syndicate, Ether said. I mean whatever you need to know to feel safe in this house. Silence. Then Ether said something that came out quieter than he probably intended. I've been feeling unsafe for 3 months. In a building I knew by heart. He paused. It wasn't the building. Draven looked at him. I know, he said. It was. I know, Draven said again. Softer this time. The space between them on that cold marble floor was about 4 feet. Neither of them closed it. But neither of them moved away. One of the pups made a sound from the adjacent room. Just the fighter. Just checking. Ether's head turned immediately. Then the sound stopped. Petra's quiet voice carrying softly through the wall. The baby settled. Ether turned back. He does that, he said. Calls out to see if anyone answers. If no one does, he escalates. He'll learn, Draven said. He's learning already, Ether said. He started doing it less after the first week. He's figuring out that someone always comes. A pause. Children figure that out fast when it's true consistently. The word consistently. It sat in the room like something carefully placed. Draven heard it. He understood exactly what it was about. I'm going to be here, he said. Ether said nothing. I know that doesn't fix anything, Draven said. I know that's not the apology you need. I know it doesn't reach back and change what I said or what I didn't do after the explosion. His voice stayed level. But it's what I have. Ether was quiet for a long time. Then, you said you didn't want a weak Omega. I know. I need you to understand what that did. Tell me, Draven said. And the way he said it, not as a demand, not as an invitation to perform. Just as someone finally ready to receive something they had been avoiding, made Ether turn toward him fully. It made me believe, Ether said, that the pregnancy would make things worse. That 4 babies would be 4 more reasons for you to walk away. He stopped. Started again. I spent the last weeks before the explosion telling myself I was protecting them by not telling you. But the truth was another stop. Longer. I was protecting myself. From hearing you say it out loud. Say what out loud? Draven knew. He didn't ask. I'm sorry, he said. 2 words. Ether didn't respond immediately. He tilted his face toward the ceiling. Eyes closed behind the blindness. Then, that's the start, he said. Not the end. I know, Draven said. Good. And for the first time since the hospital, since the divorce papers, since the flower crowns, since the 4 small faces, the space between them on that cold marble floor felt like a beginning rather than a consequence. 3 days into the mansion. That was when Zira got sick. The guilt tripper. The one who held his breath until someone paid attention. Except this time the holding of breath was not a strategy. This time something was wrong. Petra identified it at 4 in the morning. Respiratory irregularity. Common in premature births. The lungs still learning to do the work they had been pushed into too early. Not immediately life-threatening. But serious. Requiring monitoring. Requiring specific positioning. Requiring someone close. All night. Petra was there. Draven was there within 4 minutes of being woken. Ether was already there. He had heard it before anyone. He was sitting beside the small crib with one hand inside it, palm flat on Zira's chest, feeling every rise and fall, counting the rhythm, monitoring the pattern with a precision that no instrument could replace because no instrument was calibrated for this specific child the way Ether was. Draven stood in the doorway. He took in the scene. Petra with her equipment. Ether on the floor beside the crib. 3 other pups sleeping in their cribs on the other side of the room, the household functioning, the world continuing, while one small person worked harder than he should have had to at 2 months old. Draven walked in. Sat on the floor on the other side of the crib from Ether. Didn't ask what to do. Petra showed him the positioning. How to angle the mattress, how to keep the airway clear, what sounds to listen for. He listened. Retained it. Applied it. For 6 hours. They were on opposite sides of a crib. Speaking quietly about breathing patterns and positioning angles and what to do if the rhythm changed again. Not about the divorce. Not about the explosion. Not about 3 months of silence. Just this. Just 0. And somewhere in those 6 hours, in the shared attention of two people focused entirely on keeping one small person breathing steadily through a long dark night, something shifted between them that could not have shifted any other way. Not through conversation. Not through apology. Through the simple, exhausting, irreplaceable act of showing up and staying. By 6 in the morning, Zira's breathing had stabilized. Petra checked him one final time. Made a quiet sound of professional satisfaction. Then left them to it. The room was grey with early light. Ether still had his hand inside the crib. Draven was sitting against the wall on his side. Zira was asleep. Peaceful. That small chest rising and falling like it had figured something out in the night. Ether said, very quietly, "Do you regret divorcing me?" The question came out of nowhere. Or it came out of 6 hours of sitting across from each other in the dark. Depending on how you looked at it. Draven didn't answer right away. He looked at Zira's sleeping face. At the tiny hands. At the flower crown that Petra had replaced this morning because she said it was the one consistent thing and consistency mattered for premature pups. He said, yes. One word. Ether's hand moved slightly on Zira's chest. Then stilled again. Why? Ether said. Because I was afraid, Draven said. Ether waited. Not of you, Draven said. Not of the blindness. I was afraid of what it meant that you got hurt because of me. That you were paying a cost I created. He paused. And I handled that the way I handle everything I don't know how to face. By removing it, Ether said. Yes. Silence. That's not strength, Ether said. No, Draven agreed. It isn't. Another silence. Zira made a small sound. Both of them responded at exactly the same time, two hands moving toward the crib, two sets of attention sharpening simultaneously. The baby settled. They looked at each other across the crib in the grey morning light. And for the first time since the hospital room, since the divorce papers, since the explosion that changed everything. They were both present. At the same time. In the same place. Without the performance of power or the management of pain between them. Just two people. And for small lives that had survived things they shouldn't have had to survive. And a morning that was starting whether they were ready for it or not. The Mafia Council met on a Thursday. 12 men. One table. The kind of room where decisions were made that the rest of the city felt without knowing why. Draven sat at the head of it. Same as always. Black suit. Gold crown. The specific composed authority that 12 years of leadership had built into his posture so completely it looked like bone. But today the room felt different. Because today the agenda included something it had never included before. The item was listed simply as core heir status. And every man in that room knew exactly what it meant. Word had spread. It always did. For pups. Born to the blind Omega, Draven had divorced. Mafia heirs. Premature. Alive. And currently residing inside core territory under direct protection. Some of the council had opinions about this. They were going to share those opinions today. The first came from Halvik Crane, a council member who had been with the syndicate for 20 years and who communicated primarily through the strategic placement of quiet statements that sounded reasonable and landed like accusations. The situation raises questions, Halvik said, about the legitimacy of the divorce. Draven looked at him. It raises no such questions, Draven said. The divorce was legal. The question of the pup status is separate. The Omega has a name, Draven said. Use it. A beat. Ether Solrin, Halvik said. Not conceding. Just adjusting. There are those on this council who believe his presence in the core mansion creates a vulnerability. His presence eliminates a vulnerability, Draven said. The pups are safer with both parents in one location. Anyone who disagrees with that logic is welcome to explain to me how dispersal reduces kidnapping risk. Nobody explained. Because they couldn't. The second challenge came from a different direction. A younger council member, Tesson Wald, who represented a faction that had been quietly testing Draven's authority for 2 years. There are some, Tesson said, who question whether an Omega who hid a pregnancy from the Alpha King should be trusted inside this organization. The room went quiet. Not the polite quiet of discussion. The specific quiet of a room where something has been said that cannot be unsaid. Draven did not move. He looked at Tesson. For a long time. The kind of look that powerful men use instead of a raised voice because the silence is more effective. Then he said, "Let me be very clear about what actually happened." He laid it out. Flat. Clinical. Without embellishment. An Omega who had been told repeatedly that weakness was unacceptable in this household. A pregnancy kept private out of legitimate fear. A fire that was targeted at Draven. A coma. For premature births. 3 months of recovery during which no one in this organization, no one, thought to ensure the man Draven had married received support or information. He didn't hide the pups to deceive this council, Draven said. He protected them because this organization gave him every reason to believe they would be seen as liabilities. He looked around the table. If anyone in this room wants to challenge that interpretation, I'm asking them to explain which part of it is inaccurate. Nobody spoke. This is important. Because powerful rooms stay silent for 2 reasons. Because they have nothing to say. Or because the truth has just been said so exactly that arguing against it would require lying. This was the second kind. Draven said Ether Solrine is under core protection. The 4 pups are my heirs. That is the position of this council from this point forward. If anyone has a different position, they're welcome to bring it to me privately. He looked at Tesson. Then at Halvik. Then around the table. One by one. "We're done with this item," he said. The meeting moved forward. But something had changed in that room. The kind of change that doesn't announce itself. It just becomes the new structure. That evening Draven walked back into the mansion. The main hall was quiet. The pups were asleep. He found Ether in the garden. This surprised him. Because the garden was new territory. But Ether had mapped it. Of course he had. He was sitting on a stone bench near the center. Kane beside him. Face turned toward the evening air. Draven sat beside him. "How was the council?" Ether said. "Handled," Draven said. Ether nodded. A pause. "Did you defend me?" Ether said. "Yes," Draven said. "Why?" Draven looked at the garden. The evening was dark and still. Somewhere inside the house, through an open window, Petra's voice could be heard doing the last check of the night. "For sets of breathing. For small lives." He said, "Because real loyalty isn't proven in private. It's proven when standing beside someone costs you something." Ether turned his face toward him. "That's something I would have said," Ether said quietly. "I know," Draven said. "I've been listening." The garden was quiet. Then Draven said something that he had been building toward since the hospital floor, since the elevator, since 6 hours beside a crib in grey morning light. He said, "I want to announce the pups as official heirs." Ether went still. "Publicly," Draven said. "Not an internal memo. Not a syndicate filing. Public acknowledgement." The stillness stretched. "You understand what that means," Ether said. "Yes." "It makes them visible." "They're already visible," Draven said. "The Voss network already knows. The council already knows. Keeping it quiet only protects the people who benefit from the uncertainty." He turned toward Ether. "Making it official closes the gap that enemies use. It says, these children are claimed, protected, and not available for leverage. Ether was quiet for a long time. The night air moved around them. Then he said, "And me." One word. The real question. Not about the pups. About him. "What about you?" Draven said. "Am I part of the announcement?" Ether said. "Or am I the blind Omega who lives in the mansion?" Draven said, without hesitation, "You're their father. That's the announcement." Ether's hands were still on his knees. He didn't speak. But something in the way he was sitting, in the particular quality of stillness that meant he was absorbing something real, said that the answer had landed exactly where it needed to. 6 months later. The nursery was loud. Not chaotic loud. The kind of loud that meant for small people had strong opinions about the world and were not shy about expressing them. The fighter, whose full name had been decided as Kale, was currently attempting to climb something he had no business climbing and announcing his progress loudly to anyone within range. The watcher, Lysa, observed this from 3 feet away with the focused intensity of a child filing information for later use. The guilt tripper, Zira, was directing his considerable emotional intelligence toward Petra, who had learned months ago that the best response was immediate and complete attention, or the volume escalated in a manner that affected the whole floor. The laughing one, Ren, was laughing. As always. At what? Nobody was entirely sure. But the sound of it filled the room the way morning light fills a room, present before you notice it, impossible to imagine the space without once it arrives. Ether sat in the center of it, cross-legged on the floor. Both hands occupied, one steadying Kale's latest climbing ambition, one listening to Zira's communication attempts with the attention of someone receiving a briefing. He had mapped this room completely. Every piece of furniture. Every toy. Every distance. Every particular sound each pup made and what it meant. The fighter's announcements were progress reports. The watcher's silence was active processing. The guilt tripper's escalation was a request for confirmation. The laughing one's laughter was, and Ether had decided this was simply true, joy for its own sake. Ether had also mapped the rest of the mansion. All 32 rooms. For floors. The garden. The corridor between the east wing and the staff quarters where the air pressure changed at night. The third step on the main staircase that was slightly higher than the others. The window in the library that let in street sound at a specific frequency when the wind came from the north. He knew this house. He had made it his. Draven found him there at 8 in the morning the way he found him there most mornings now. Not because of a schedule. Not because of a protocol. Because it was where Ether was, and where Ether was had become, without either of them formally naming it, where Draven went. He sat down on the floor. Kale immediately redirected his climbing efforts toward Draven's arm. Draven held still. Let him climb. Stabilized him at the top. Ether tracked the sound of it. He's going to break your watch, Ether said. He can have the watch, Draven said. Ether turned his face toward him. That watch is worth. He can have it, Draven said. A beat. Then Ether laughed. Not a polite sound. A real one. Short and sudden and entirely unguarded. Draven looked at him. Ren, in the corner, laughed too. For entirely unrelated reasons. But the timing was perfect. The room held that for a moment. For pups and 2 adults on a nursery floor on a morning that looked like every other morning and was entirely different from every morning that had come before it. Then Kale grabbed the watch. The room recovered from laughter. Draven retrieved the watch. Kale expressed his dissatisfaction. Zira weighed in on the situation with serious commentary. Lysa observed and filed. Ren laughed. This was life. Not the version Draven had built. The version that had arrived despite him. Despite the divorce papers. Despite the silence. Despite every word spoken in the months before an explosion that was meant for him and had instead taken something from a man who never should have been in its path. Later that afternoon. After the morning chaos, after the feeding, after Petra had taken over and Draven had 3 syndicate calls and Ether had spent 2 hours in the garden in the particular quiet that he said helped him recalibrate, they sat together at the kitchen table. Coffee. Both of them. Ordinary. Ether said, "The world I thought I lost." Draven looked at him. "I've been thinking about that," Ether said. 3 months in the hospital. I kept thinking, everything is gone. Everything I knew how to do, everything I could see, every version of my life that I had planned. He turned his cup slowly on the table. But that's not what happened. What happened? Draven said. It changed, Ether said. The world didn't disappear. It became something I had to learn from the beginning. He paused. And somewhere in learning it again, he stopped. What? Draven said. Ether said, quietly, I found out which parts of it were actually worth keeping. He wasn't looking toward Draven. He didn't need to. The kitchen was warm. Somewhere upstairs, Kale was announcing something. Ren was laughing. Zero was requiring immediate confirmation. Lysa was watching. The world Ether thought he lost had not disappeared. It had simply been waiting for him to feel it again. Not with his eyes. With everything else. And in that kitchen, on that ordinary afternoon, Draven Core. The man who had arrived at a hospital with divorce papers and left holding 2 of his own children for the first time, reached across the table. Not dramatically. Not with a speech. Just his hand. Placed beside Ether's on the table. Ether's fingers found it. And held on. That was it. That was the whole story. They had called him weak. They had called him disposable. They had watched him sign divorce papers in a hospital gown and gone home to their regular lives. And he became the most loved person in every room he entered. They had to keep watching. Good. If this story moved something in you, if you've ever been told you were too much or not enough, or if you've watched someone rebuild themselves from a place nobody should have to rebuild from, say something in the comments. Your words are not small. Someone out there needs exactly what you're about to write. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story on this channel. Every week we bring you something real, stories about people who were underestimated, who survived anyway, and who built something more honest than what they lost. The next story is already coming. And it starts exactly the way this one did, in a room full of people who thought the ending had already been written. It hadn't. Don't miss it.